the new escalation in the war in the Middle East, which was the attack on the oil refinery, one of the main oil refineries in Iran, one of the most important ones, which was South Pars. They call it South Pars or Asaluya refinery. And this is a new escalation. And your understanding of this sort of move, it seems that Netanyahu didn't do it, without coordinating with the United States. Axios reported that they were coordinating with the United States before the attack. So the United States knew the attack is coming. They went along with Netanyahu's agenda. And right now they're opening something that Iran has a lot of leverage if tries. And as Iran is hitting Saudi Arabia, as we talk, they're hitting Saudi Arabia and Qatar. How do you see the escalation, and what was the main reason of going that far, which they know how fragile is the situation on their part?
Well, it's I wouldn't want to second guess what's going on between Israel and the United States. Other than people have to understand that this was intentional. This was intentional. This wasn't an accident. It was intentional. So the question is why? And it seems like the Trump administration would be going basically following Israel. And this gets to the heart of the debate, which is raging, which I've been talking about, and others. But there's a lot of people that say, no, there's no way that Israel is dictating U.S. military actions. There's no way Israel is dictating U.S. Foreign policy decisions. But I don't think that's the case. The evidence, the preponderance of evidence says otherwise. So I don't think anyone's making that argument at this point is not serious argument. There's a lot of people who claim to be geopolitical analysts or, experts, and they're making this argument as if, and what they're doing is playing into the hands of the Israelis and the Americans because they're playing good cop, bad cop. Okay, the U.S. and Israel are like a tag team. Okay, and unfortunately, one of those tag team partners has a much greater leverage over the other. The smaller partner, Israel, has greater political leverage over Washington. And that's evidenced, again, it's documented. Simply just look at the campaign contributions of the last election cycle. So the question is, your question, Nima, is why? Why this level of escalation? Because clearly Iran already said beforehand that any attack like this on their oil and gas energy infrastructure is going to mean immediate retaliation against the Gulf states' energy infrastructure. So, that's the lifeblood of the Gulf. These monarchies wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be able to afford to buy all this U.S. military protection if they don't have oil and gas to sell. I mean, it's as simple as that. So what's going on here? And one has to look at this and think, is it a strategy of Israel to destroy the Gulf countries and, and then whatever comes in their wake through chaotic upheavals or deprivation, this will be very easily controlled by Israel, either in terms of military threats, blackmail, and in conjunction with the United States. So if they feel that these Gulf families that have been installed initially by the British and then taken over in terms of custodianship by the United States, in terms of controlling these monarchies, it seems like perhaps maybe their time is up. Maybe their time is up. Or if they're not showing themselves to be, subservient enough, vassalized enough to the wishes of America, because some stern words have been made by some of the Gulf leaders, specifically from Saudi Arabia, but not only from Saudi Arabia, pretty much, condemning and heavily criticizing the United States starting this war against Iran, because the Gulf states knew what could potentially come. Washington knew what could potentially come, but they felt the Iranians were bluffing, perhaps, Or is it a case that Israel wants to destroy these Gulf countries, weaken them, and ultimately take them over? Because all of them withdrew, for the most part, from the Abraham Accords. Okay, Saudi being the lead actor in that. Israel already attacked Qatar militarily just a few months ago. So that's a big change. So Israel doesn't really respect, or they don't need these Gulf families in charge. They'd much rather put a U.S. or an Israeli puppet in charge, or have the country torn to pieces, and then come in after the dust settles, and then strike up a deal with these Gulf monarchies, that if they're not on board with the Abraham Accords, if they're not going to endorse a genocide of the native Palestinian population, then they're gone. They're out. And this is they're getting Iran to potentially do their dirty work for them. Perhaps, maybe that's not the intention of Iran, but that end result will be weakened monarch states in the Persian Gulf. Now, which way that goes in the end, Nima, it's anyone's guess at this point. But that's the only explanation I can come up with here, because this was intentional. This wasn't just they got the wrong target, or they went a little bit overzealous. This is strategic by Israel. They know what's coming after this. And Iran has very little choice. I mean, the only choice Iran has at this point, other than to retaliate in kind, would be to go to the Gulf states like Qatar and said, well, if you're going to allow the Americans and the Israelis to destroy our LNG or natural gas, then you're going to have to supply us with natural gas, and you're going to do it for free. Otherwise, we're going to destroy your supply. They would have to basically extort oil and gas from the Gulf states to keep Iran going. Otherwise, it's going to be in kind retaliation, which is what we're seeing. I believe this is what we're seeing now today. So, I mean, that's my best explanation. Is there's a bigger plan here, and that bigger plan is possibly to throw some of these Gulf monarch families under the bus, the U.S. and Israel. If they cared about them, they wouldn't have started this war.
Yeah.
Simple. So I mean, we need to start like expanding our view of this and think outside the box, because certainly, the Greater Israel Project is not going to exist with stubborn Gulf Arab states. Simple. No, whether that plan is going to come to fruition or not, whether that's going to work for Israel and the U.S., that's another matter. But we are seeing an intentional move designed to get Iran to strike back at Gulf oil and gas facilities. So it's not like Trump cares about the global economy. In fact, for the U.S., and this is where there's a U.S. advantage here, is the beneficiary of this is going to be U.S. oil and gas companies. They will dominate. Russia will also be a beneficiary, but I think that's a secondary matter. But first and foremost, it will be the U.S. So that's, if you want to look at it from that point of view, that's a continuation of the U.S.-led operation to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline, which then created a dependency in Europe on overpriced, extortionately priced U.S. LNG, liquefied natural gas, into the Northern European market. Now you have the Southern European market cut off from Qatari LNG supplies. And the U.S. believes that it can just ramp up production and price. And maybe Trump thinks he's going to pay off the $40 trillion national debt this way, by basically sucking the life out of the rest of the planet and getting everybody hooked on overpriced U.S. oil and gas. I mean, they might feel they can temporarily share the market with the U.S. and then deprive China and South Korea and Japan, maybe discipline the Middle East a little bit, maybe get them to buy U.S. oil and gas at extortionate rates. I mean, so from that point of view, Nima, that's what this looks like. So we can look at it from the Israeli point of view of reshaping the Middle East, for subservient client states, obedient client states, and then the U.S. benefit would be to increase U.S. demand for U.S. oil and gas at substantially higher prices. That's what it looks like to me, Nima. That's my best educated guess.
I think that makes sense because you remember when Donald Trump went to the Middle East and the Israelis were so much afraid how much leverage these Arab states would have on Donald Trump because they were bribing Donald Trump left and right, and that's why they thought that these guys are getting, so much power in Washington. You remember with the military cooperation with Qatar, they were somehow, you know, so much against it in Israel, and right now the war is doing everything for them. And the problem is, Patrick, that it doesn't seem that the United States sees these countries as sovereign nations. They see them as some sort of, territory with uh, some rich people there, and is that gonna influence the leadership, or they're gonna be in the same position as they were before, as they are right now, and they will be in the same sort of mindset.
There's two ways you can. This is a very important question you may hear. Okay, this is the nature of the Gulf states, their ability to rule in their respective territories, and then what is their exact relationship with the West, with the U.S. in particular. So one way you can look at it is that the United States provides military protection to keep the families in power, to keep the families in power. And as long as the U.S. keeps those families in power, they can control those states. They can also harvest the oil revenue in terms of the petrodollar, bought and sold in U.S. dollars. And the quid pro quo has been since the early 1970s that those Arab states would then reinvest the dollars to buy U.S. Treasury bills, U.S. debt, basically pump up Wall Street. Okay, there's whole institutions that have been built on the back of this petrodollar, like Citibank is a good example. Powerhouse on Wall Street. It pretty much has been inflated and built up by Arab petrodollars. Okay, major institutions that actually exert a lot of control over the U.S. government policies. And Citibank handpicked Obama's cabinet in 2008. Okay, that shows you now how that circular relationship works. So that's one way you can look at it. Okay, and then with that money, they also buy U.S. weapons, U.S. jets, okay, U.S. missile defense, all sorts of U.S. things, and the U.S. pretends to provide protection for those Gulf states. So that's one. But to me, since the petrodollar is still it still helps prop up the U.S. World Reserve currency. The United States still needs it, but in terms of direct oil sales from the Gulf, in terms of the U.S., it's less and less. It's a diminishing amount over years, and while Europe still buys a substantial amount from them, well, definitely in terms of LNG from Qatar, in terms of straight up oil sales, it's not what it used to be. The Far East is the main beneficiary of supplies from the Persian Gulf. So, and Iran is part of that equation as well. But what you have to the real relationship right now is that these Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and the other Gulf, Bahrain, okay, they spend their money. They're just used to spending money on U.S. military gear, and it makes them look tough. It also buys them a lot of favor from the U.S. in terms of the political and from the defense industry, and also from banking and finance, and it brings them into the Western game in a big way. But it doesn't provide any protection for them, not really. It's a protection racket, and the U.S. is really extorting kind of just you know overprivileged hereditary Arab monarchs. They use them. They're milking them. They're milking them for as much money as they can get out of them to buy the latest F-35 or the latest tank or the latest defense systems, or Patriot missile batteries or whatever. They know that they're a soft touch. And they also know that the U.S.'s strategy has been to be aggressive towards Iran for years, and then they would use Iran's sort of aggressive posture back at Israel and the U.S. They would use that and tell the Arab countries, look, Iran's a threat. Iran's a threat. You need to arm up. We're going to provide you with this. And you can't even fire a gun you buy from the United States without the U.S. giving you approval. You can't fly any air missions. You can't light up your Patriot missile batteries. You can't do anything. It's all U.S. technician teams, U.S. soldiers, U.S. staff, U.S. maintenance. Everything is U.S. You have no independent military at all if you buy from America. Nothing. You're basically just an outsourced franchise of the Pentagon. So politically, you have no independence at all. So they're stuck in this trap because the leadership was very short-sighted, very corrupt, and not very smart. And just to prove to you, the culmination of this, Nima, was during Barack Obama's second term. And Barack Obama and a young MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who was probably only 32 or 33 years old in 2015, okay, they convinced Saudi Arabia. I think he was defense minister. I can't remember his actual position at that time. They convinced Saudi Arabia under Obama to attack Yemen and to launch a full-scale war against the neighboring country of Yemen. Of course, we know why that was. It was really a U.S. and Israeli operation, and using the UAE and getting them to pay for a lot of it, but to partition Yemen, not just because of the oil in the south, but also to isolate Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, and also to reclaim control of the Bab el Mandeb Straits and the entire Gulf of Aden. So it was a geopolitical move. Okay, but what that showed was that they wanted to get Saudi Arabia to lead in that war. It was all U.S. planes. Everything was U.S. There's even reports that the United States were flying the missions, but they had Saudi flags on U.S. jets. I mean, and they got other countries to get involved in this coalition, and that was the peak of this arrangement. And that went on for 8 years, 9 years. It started in March 2015, and it really didn't end until probably around 2023. It was being wound down, but it's still actually going. So that shows you these countries have zero independence, zero sovereignty. All of these royal families serve at the pleasure of the United States and ultimately Israel. Because if Israel wants to rub any of these out, they're gone in 48 hours. They're out. And any one of these, Israel can do it for the United States, or the U.S. could do it. But the U.S. doesn't want to be seen to do that publicly, so they can get Israel to do some of their dirty work there. So maybe this is a case of what's happening here. So all of this facade is falling apart. This facade, it's now clear. The U.S. is, because of what Israel and the U.S. did, they drew fire to all of these Gulf countries. That these foolish, I'll be kind, foolish Gulf monarchs were paying billions of dollars in protection from the U.S. And look what it got them. No protection. They couldn't protect Qatar from Israel. And then drawing fire, the whole facade of this phony relationship. It's a predatory relationship. The U.S. preys on these naive, spoiled, overprivileged Gulf hereditary families. They use Iran to threaten them, to create a case for them to buy more arms. They cash in on the stock market. They get their petrodollars in New York. I mean, it's such a scam. And the U.S. has been running this scam with the Gulf Arabs since for a long time, but really since the early 70s. And it's just gotten worse and worse. They keep doubling down. Now look at it. It's a mess. And as people in the U.S. and the Gulf, they're thinking, well, let's just wipe the board now. I mean, or in Israel, in the U.S., let's just wipe the board now. We'll put new governments in. We'll find other royals we can, there'll be a palace coup. Watch, watch. And they'll take over. And those will become colonies of Israel and the U.S. That's where they're heading. There's no way they'll allow an Arab nationalist movement to take power in any of these countries, like even Bahrain. But that's probably not going to happen anyway because they can be crushed immediately. Any sort of political movement can be crushed. Israel will assassinate every last one of them, like they're trying to do with the Iranians now. So, sorry to paint a very dark picture here, but we're looking at potential paradigm shifts, major upheavals in the Gulf as a result of what we're seeing here. I cannot see it coming back to where it was before. I just can't see it.
Patrick, the Strait of Hormuz is continuing to be one of the greatest challenges that the Trump administration and Israelis are facing in this war against Iran. And Donald Trump is doing everything to push, to somehow force the Europeans into the conflict. It doesn't mean that Europeans are not part of the war. They're part of the war on the defensive front. They're defending, they're doing everything for the United States and Israel right now, but they don't wanna go on offensive, particularly when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Because I think one of the reasons is what you've just mentioned with the case of Nord Stream pipeline. They have sabotaged Nord Stream pipeline, and if not the Middle East, if they make a war in the Middle East on the Strait of Hormuz, which they know that this is not a viable choice for them to go that far because nobody would be able to open the Strait of Hormuz. I think the calculation on their part is this. What is your understanding of the Europeans, sort of move, sort of reaction to what Donald Trump is asking for?
Well, he's not really getting a lot of uptake from the Europeans. Not really in terms of their involvement. Italy, the UK, France. They've all got troops deployed and attached to the various U.S. bases constantly, and that's because these European countries need to be involved in everything to have operational readiness. So they're always going to be like attached at the hip, even as in a minor role, but it sort of justifies the internal military industrial complex of those respective European countries who are also NATO members. So it's just part of them being involved. The British always have to be involved in every single raid, coup, war. They have to just be there next to the United States because otherwise their forces won't get any experience. And then that's going to hurt their ability to get military budgets the following year. So this is just a game that's constantly being played. But in terms of getting them to come in to help open the Straits of Hormuz, why would Donald Trump be asking that? If the U.S. has the most powerful military in the world, if they're winning, if they destroyed the Iranian Navy, if they destroyed their Air Force, and they destroyed all of their missiles or half their missiles or whatever Trump's claiming this particular afternoon, or that particular breakfast session, whatever the case may be, why would they need Europeans to help? Why not just call Israel and come have Israel has a navy, they've got ships, they can come do it. Why not? They're their greatest friend and ally. Because the US have done this very cynically. Trump wants to draw in the Europeans to create a target in order to diffuse the tension, and also if it's just the U.S. and Israel, that's just a big giant target. That's just going to motivate the Iranians even more, and then that's going to inflame the situation even more. So they want to bring in the Europeans with this idea that Iran may not want to attack a European naval vessel for fear of drawing in a European power to ally with the U.S. and Israel. But that's exactly what Trump wants to do. He wants to use the Europeans as shields. Yeah. And so there's some European countries that are smart enough to see this. There's others that aren't so bright, but they all have one problem. It's that they are completely subservient and vassalized to Washington, and it's very hard for them to get out of that role. So what Trump will do is to offer them some kind of. He's always trying to use every situation to leverage some transaction that has to do with another sort of separate situation. In the case of Europeans, that those separate situations would be like bargaining chips, like Ukraine, for instance, like some kind of a NATO arrangement. He's already trashed NATO, and he's blamed the European countries. He said to them at the press conference this week, he says, "Well, I don't understand why the European countries don't want to help. I mean, we didn't have to come and help with Ukraine, but we did." No, the U.S. actually started the Ukraine war. They launched the coup and the civil war under Obama in 2014, and Donald Trump himself flooded the Ukraine with weapons and lethal aid during his first term, and he also sabotaged the Minsk peace process during his first term. His government did that. Okay, so that was the war wouldn't have happened had Trump not done those things, and Obama also as well. So the U.S. as a whole, the United States, is responsible for the Ukraine war, 100%. They've led it, they've driven it, they created it, they dragged the Europeans into it to create a proxy war, to create a threat to Europe, so that the Europeans were then motivated to defend themselves. This is all manipulation by the U.S. Okay, so Trump trying to play that card in one way, this is good, because hopefully it'll wake up some of these Europeans and these sort of bureaucrats and technocrats that are completely lost and drowning in their own propaganda. Okay, but what Trump will also do is perhaps leverage this to get some sort of a uh, deal on Greenland with Denmark, for instance, or to be less aggressive with Greenland. Who knows? But this White House will try anything. They'll try anything. It's a gaggle of absolute degenerates, just absolute white collar criminals who fancy themselves as international gangsters at this point, who have no regard for U.S. law, U.S. constitutional law, international law, any treaty or convention, United Nations Charter, nothing. Nothing. They've trashed it all. They make fun of it. They deride it. And they thumb their nose at anybody that's trying to raise any kind of a humanitarian or some sort of human rights or moral argument. They don't care. This is a rogue state now. It's a rogue hegemon. It's no longer a superpower. To be a superpower, you have to have the cooperation of partners. You have to lead through institutions and through cooperation and trust. And Donald Trump inherited that, but Joe Biden did tremendous damage to this, by the way. But Donald Trump still inherited a superpower. What Donald Trump's going to leave after 4 years is not a superpower. It's a rogue hegemon. And that's an empire in steep, steep decline. That's what Trump will have left if he makes it through 4 years. I don't think at this rate he may not. Some people in the U.S. will have to, call in their better angels to invoke the 25th Amendment, that he's not mentally fit to be president. I mean, what we're witnessing now and what's being said and done, it's unbelievable. It's doing irreparable damage to the future of the United States, and it's risking a full-blown third world war, because there are other powers in the world that are looking at this and saying, actually, the United States is threatening us now. The U.S. has become, and Israel as his partner, have become an existential threat to the world now, on a scale that we have never seen before. If you think about Japan and Germany, yes, well, more so Japan in the Pacific theater, in terms of its expansionist, imperial, designs and strategies and so forth. I mean, it's significant. It was significant, but with Germany, fairly localized. I mean, aside from Eastern Europe and the Russian front, a little bit in North Africa, the United States is projecting this uh, continuously around the globe. They're talking about 3 front, 4 front, major major conflagrations they want to manage simultaneously, with the help, of course, of Israel. And Israel has its own ambitions to dominate the Middle East with the Greater Israel Project. And maybe to do that, they need to weaken the United States a little bit. And that's actually being done right now. There's different ways we can look at this, Nima, but you know, how this is going to, how Iran fits into this equation. It really just comes down to a war of attrition, resilience, the possibility of deterrence. If the U.S. and Israel have depleted their interceptor stocks and military ammunitions sufficiently that it might lead to some kind of a ceasefire or pause or some sort of armistice in all of this. Uh, that's that's about all we can say at this point, I think.
Patrick, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, recently, the foreign minister of Iran, Araqchi, he had an interview in which, with Al Jazeera, he said that they're defining the mechanism of the Strait of Hormuz. You know, they're trying to. It's not going to get back to the same situation it had before. It seems that Iran is seriously considering how to manage the Strait of Hormuz. And there is an article in the Financial Times that argues that Iran's actions in the Strait of Hormuz show the reality of multipolar economic warfare. For decades, the United States dominated sanctions and used financial pressures as a strategic weapon. Now, other powers like India and like Iran and China can use similar tools to respond in response to escalations. This is literally what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, I don't know if they were planning for this, but the United States forced them to take this new position. And how do you see the management of the Strait of Hormuz on the part of Iranians as time goes by, when in the aftermath of this war or during this war?
Well, that all depends, Nima, about the well, firstly, the production capacity of the Gulf states, of Iran in oil and gas. What's going to be the production capacity? Because as it stands, the U.S. and Israel can bring the Iranian production capacity to near zero if they choose. Okay. Now, that's not to say Iran won't be able to also get supplied from other sources. They certainly can, and they can do some domestic supply themselves. But in terms of their export capacity, that can be severely damaged. Okay, and this is why Iran also wanted to pursue a nuclear power, civilian nuclear power strategy, because they knew that their petroleum resources and this production capacity could be targeted through either through sanctions, or through other means, which we're seeing now. So that's why they wanted a diverse portfolio in terms of energy, and that makes perfect sense. That's why the U.S. is targeting their civilian nuclear. It's not because of weapons. It's because it provides an outlet in the event that, so it would allow them to power cities, to power their industries and so forth. This is why the U.S. strategically attacked Germany's nuclear power and convinced Germany by co-opting and infiltrating the so-called Green Movement in Germany, the Green Party, got them to shut down their nuclear fleet. Very clever. And then they destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, cut off their gas. So it left Germany with nothing, left Germany with coal, and Germany has to pay carbon indulgence tax for firing up any of their coal plants. They're paying that. They're paying extra, let's call Uncle Sam tax for taking expensive U.S. LNG across the Atlantic. So the U.S. has made Germany bankrupt, brought it down, their economy down, and then dependent on U.S. energy. And they have no nuclear power. I mean, the Germans are just stupid. I mean, it's just the most idiotic move by successive German governments, maybe in modern history. Just like no regard for their own sovereignty. You can't be sovereign unless you're energy independent. If you're energy dependent, more than 50% of your energy, you're not really sovereign. You then have to do a lot of negotiations and trading and to maintain some independence. But ultimately, you're going to be dependent. And so that you're going to have good diplomatic relations with your neighbors if you can't do that. So it is the future of the region. If the Arabs aren't producing, then what is the Straits of Hormuz at that point? It's the Persian Gulf could become a dead lake compared to what it has been in the last 50 years. So we have to look at that situation now. Look at Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline to Yanbu in the Red Sea, the petrol line. They're looking that this is a potential, pressure release valve to the situation, but that's not going to provide 8 million barrels of oil per day. And that's the estimated shortfall of the Persian Gulf right now, 8 million per day to the global supply. And so that's why the International Energy Agency announced this great release of 400 million barrels of oil reserves. That's basically a month and a half. It's a month and a half. It's nothing. It's not a solution to anything. It's an act of desperation. And so the most that Saudi can ship to the Red Sea is probably right now, in terms of the capacity of that pipeline and the processing on the end at the port. You're talking about 1.5, 1.7 million barrels a day, maximum current capacity for those facilities. They'd have to do serious upgrades to that system to get it up to where it could do maybe 4 or 5 million barrels per day. And they're probably working on that right now. But guess what? That same port in Saudi on the Red Sea coast has been attacked by Ansar Allah, by the Houthis previously. It's completely within the range of the Yemenis. So it's another front in the war that's potentially opened up here. How can they manage all these fronts? This is a disaster. So, I mean, until the Gulf Arabs pull their finger out and realize and prioritize their own existence and the welfare of the region, of the future of their people, and not their bank accounts in New York, and not whatever deals they've got going on the back end with Israelis and AI and all the rest of it, then the situation for them is terminal. It's terminal. The U.S. is very happy to knock them offline. They probably believe they can survive for a while, and they're going to make so much money in terms of oil and gas from America. But America will bankrupt the rest of the world through inflation, through squeezing on supplies and using leverage. Imagine what Trump would do if the Gulfs were offline. What sort of racketeering do you think threats you're going to see from the U.S.? Look what they're doing to Cuba. They won't even allow Mexico and Venezuela to give fuel to Cuba, so he's starving the country. Famine, no problem. Mass death, no problem. We're doing it because we're fighting the communists. I mean, it's just the level that America's at right now. This is the lowest the United States has ever been in its history of its country. Right now, lower than Vietnam, because at least with Vietnam they had the fake excuse that they were battling communism. They at least had this ideological excuse within the framework of a Cold War, and to some degree that could be seen as somewhat legitimate because this was a nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and America. So there was this existential threat looming in the background, if you will. I mean, so they sort of had that as a type of an excuse. What have they got now? What's the menace now that the U.S. is fighting? Is it the menace they're fighting is that they're not going to be able to dominate everything going forward? They might have to share the cutting edge of civilization with China. Is that the big threat to the U.S.? You can't sell that. You could sell a Cold War. You could sell communism. You could sell to your own people, and you could probably sell to the world, half the world back then. They have nothing to sell now but intimidation, racketeering, protection rackets, fear, uh, just open threats of annihilation, threats of ethnic cleansing, siege warfare. That's what the U.S. is selling right now. And Israel's been selling that for 75 years to the Palestinians and to the region. Look at what Israel's doing to Lebanon. They're taking out city blocks in a premier metropolitan city in West Asia, Beirut. Do you see anybody pushing back from Europe against this? Do you see anybody standing up in Congress? No, they're all for it. We are in an age of brutality right now. This is an age of savagery right now. And it's not because the U.S. is savage. It's not because Israel is brutal and barbaric. It's the reason it's happening is because no country will stand up to oppose it, not even rhetorically, not even diplomatically. Russia and China might have something to say about it, but it's nothing at the moment. At the moment, it's Iran versus the world, with some assistance from the Chinese and the Russians. In terms of intelligence, maybe some military coordination, some cooperation. But besides that, it's Iran versus the world at this moment. I mean, so what do you think the logical outcome of this is going to be? It's not going to be good for the Gulf, I can tell you right now.